Brought to you by...
According to Wikipedia, Stockholm Syndrome is a condition in which hostages develop a psychological bond with their captors during captivity. Emotional bonds may be formed between captors and captives during intimate time together, but these are generally considered irrational in light of the danger or risk endured by the victims. Stockholm Syndrome has never been included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the standard tool for diagnostic or psychiatric illnesses and disorders, mainly due to the lack of a consistent body of academic research. The syndrome is rare. According to data from the FBI, about 5% of hostage victims show evidence of Stockholm Syndrome. Single, naive Millie is kidnapped by her damaged psychotic date, who uses brutal forms of torture to reprogram her to love him. The question is, will Millie find a way out and to remain some measure of the person she used to be, or will she bend to his will and come crawling back into his arms? This film opens by forcing us to witness an abusive moment between a young couple, a violent fragment of time as they return home from a date. We witness his aggression from afar as we are kept separate from this moment, witnessing it through a locked door and a frosted pane of glass. When she finally gets inside, she calls the police, and we are introduced to how in danger she really is. This moment is only the beginning of a horrific series of events to follow, as from here, the effects of the drugs he gave her take hold, and she is taken captive. It was an interesting choice to begin our story here, not giving us time to learn much of anything about these characters, especially our protagonists, before the horrors of the film finally begin. We are meant to experience this film alongside our protagonist, to live out her torture and torment alongside her, experiencing it visually as spectators, unable to help her. The cinematography through this film is among some of the most beautifully captured that I have seen. It makes use of some of the most romantic and dreamlike techniques to explore the truly disturbing arena of this narrative. I know what you must be thinking. How can something so grim and vile be captured with beauty and grace? Trust me, I get it. I wouldn't have thought so either. But this film manages it with a precision skill. Each scene is lit gorgeously to allow so much to fall into deep shadow, illuminating just enough to feel like these two are isolated from the rest of the world, cut off from any chance of help, as if there's a spotlight on them, holding our attention on the horrors that our protagonist will experience. The audio throughout this film is captured so cleanly that it creates an intimacy for us, between the killer and his captor, between them and us. There's an obvious attention to detail put forth here, especially when it comes to texture. It utilizes patterns where other films would only make use of flat, empty canvases, which for me provided a realism to the film that was almost felt through each scene. The color palette of the film is a beautiful contrast of vibrancy and dark lifelessness. Sequences in cold isolation are lit with limited means to provide a hollow emptiness to the isolated world that he has her trapped in. Scenes outside in the daylight introduce the warmth of sunlight, the lush green of life that thrives far from where she is being kept. Even small details like the fact that the house is shown to us out of focus, isolated in a clearing with no vegetation anywhere near it, as if the idea of its construction was to keep hope of life outside its walls far from it. The performances here are splendidly grim. There is some clear talent and devotion to the believability of this situation on display that can't be ignored. Though we begin with no real measure of who the protagonist is, I think the idea behind this choice was sound. It allows us to place ourselves into her predicament, projecting our fears and our memories and our traumas onto her blank slate. In essence, she is a stand-in for who we would be in a situation like this. The antagonist here is a twisted mind, a man whose devotion to capturing this moment in time with Millie has led him to attempt to recondition her into reciprocating his emotions. This level of twisted control is the stuff that we have seen before in films like the Poughkeepsie tapes, where there is an attempt to break down and fracture the human spirit, and the will to live without the captor. At no moment did I feel a lack of the antagonist's control throughout this experience. Even when he gives her the chance to prove her devotion by severing some of her bonds, to me, he knew he had the situation under control, that there was nothing she could do to escape him. Despite the fact that she has already seen what this man looks like, he chooses to obscure his face with a sack, keeping him a more imposing figure to her, and a mysterious monster to us as the willing spectators of his misdeeds. There's something horribly soothing about the way he speaks. His speech pattern is slow and calm, almost comforting at moments, creating an uneasiness in us as we watch what he is doing to her. There is also no real attempt to entirely hide our antagonist's true face from us. It isn't long before it is revealed to us, but introduces the notion that he wears the mask for reasons that she is not yet ready to understand. The most unsettling part about him is that he isn't some horrific monster. He is a fairly good-looking guy by the standards of most, with slightly piercing eyes and a gentle smile. So much of the film explores violation in a truly horrific fashion, as he drugs her and asserts his dominance onto her in ways far more intimately than any rape fantasy would provide to a disturbed mind. He strips and bathes her with gentle care. When she awakens at one point, he has painted her nails, and he makes sure that she is well nourished. Throughout the film, we begin to experience flashes, fragments of moments that did not take place. We see the two of them together, our protagonist and antagonist, sharing intimate moments alone together. We're given these moments as she is experiencing the agony of his torment, his actions rewriting her mind, the trauma he is inflicting on her causing her to yearn for it, need to stay with him. There is almost an attempt to romanticize captivity, making use of beautiful slow motion and soft lighting and depth of field to further enhance the terrifying nature of Stockholm Syndrome. I love the fact that this imprisonment is never sexualized in any way. He never attempts to violate her in an aggressive manner, or even become sexual with her at all, because this forced relationship isn't about that. It's about sharing an intimacy that is unquantifiable. There are moments in this film that we cannot be sure are real. We watch as our antagonist watches her, wearing the mask as she cleans, hovering over her, and even attacking her. It makes me wonder if these moments are actually taking place, or if they are a manifestation of the oppression that she is living under, possibly all in her mind. Even through her psychological crumbling and growing attachment to her captor, we see elements of her pain bleeding through her performance in fading smiles and fighting back tears. The entirety of the film is a twisted presentation of control, a psychological Beauty and the Beast story in many ways. It takes the time to seclude you into this confined situation, but still takes steps to remind us that this place of terror is not all there is. The film uses these small cutaways as we transition from scene to scene, shots like a tree in the foreground, positioned from the house, with the house out of focus in the background, reminding us that there is a living world outside of this confined hell. The film continues to build these moments of tension again and again, where we assume that the girls have poisoned food and are attempting to trick him into eating it. Yet, each time we are let down. Each time it doesn't happen, subverting what we expect in a perfect sort of way, until suddenly it all hits him. Eventually, we knew it was going to happen, but the question was when. We suddenly realized that our protagonist may have been more devious than our antagonist, as the love and affection that we thought was developing was a brilliant ruse that would ultimately win both women their freedom from his oppression. As he fades, we watch the other girl go settle down and consume the cake, choosing to die alongside him, because as twisted as it is, her love for him at some point became real, and she can now no longer imagine a life without his control.